Story 1. The man in the empty ward. The hospital always felt different at night. During the day it was filled with the usual chaos, doctors barking orders, machines beeping, families pacing halls. But once visiting hours ended, the fluorescent-lit corridors fell silent, and the hum of the ventilation became the loudest sound. For Clara, a newly graduated nurse on her third week of night shifts, the silence was unnerving. She had been assigned to the East Wing, which mostly held recovering patients and a few long-term cases. Tonight, however, the wing felt emptier than usual. Only 3 patients were admitted, all sedated and resting quietly. It should have been an easy shift. By 2 in the morning, Clara was making her rounds. She carried her clipboard, trying to ignore the way her own footsteps echoed down the linoleum floor. She stopped at room 12, checked on the elderly man inside, and gently adjusted his blanket. Everything seemed normal, but as she turned to leave, a faint shuffle of footsteps carried down the hallway. Clara frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone else on this floor. The other nurse had gone to assist an emergency, leaving Clara alone for the moment. She stepped into the hallway, scanning both directions. That was when she saw him. At the far end of the corridor, half hidden in the shadows, a man stood. He wasn't dressed like a patient, no gown, no wristband. He wore a faded brown coat and trousers that looked decades out of style. His posture was odd too, slightly slouched, as if weighed down by something unseen. "Sir," Clara called softly, "can I help you? Visiting hours ended at 8. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned and stepped into room 14. Clara felt a jolt of unease. That room was supposed to be empty. Its last patient had been discharged 2 days ago. Gripping her clipboard tighter, Clara hurried down the hall and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, untouched. The blinds were half drawn, and the faint city lights outside bled through. Clara's pulse quickened. She glanced around the corners, even checked the small bathroom. Nothing. The man was gone. Shaking her head, she muttered, "Get it together, Clara. It's just fatigue." But her nerves refused to settle. An hour later, while updating charts at the nurse's station, Clara heard it again, the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. This time they came from room 16. Setting her pen down, she moved quickly, her heart thudding in her ears. Inside room 16, the scene made her freeze. The man was there again, seated beside the bed of a sleeping patient. His head hung low as if in prayer, and his hands rested on his knees. For a moment, Clara thought she could hear him whispering, though the words were indistinguishable. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling, "you can't be here." The man finally looked up. His face was pale, features soft, but his eyes looked impossibly tired, as if he hadn't slept in years. He gave her the faintest smile, sad, almost apologetic. Then, without a sound, he simply faded. His body dissolved into the shadows until there was nothing left. Clara gasped, stumbling back against the doorframe. The patient stirred but remained asleep. She didn't sleep at all that night. By the next morning, Clara convinced herself it had been stress, exhaustion, maybe even a trick of the lights. But curiosity gnawed at her. On her break, she went to the security office and asked to review the surveillance footage from the East Wing. The guard, a middle-aged man named Patrick, humored her and pulled up the camera feed from the previous night. Clara leaned forward, pointing at the time stamp. "Here, that's when I saw him." On the grainy footage, she watched herself walk briskly into room 16. She could see her lips moving as she spoke, see herself pause at the bedside, even back away as if startled. But there was no one else in the frame. The chair was empty. The bed was undisturbed. She was alone the entire time. Clara's skin prickled with cold. Patrick gave her a skeptical look, but didn't press. "You're probably just tired. Happens to a lot of new staff," he said. She didn't argue, but deep inside, she knew she hadn't imagined him. That evening, Clara returned to her shift with a nervous knot in her stomach. She avoided room 16 as long as she could, but near midnight, she forced herself to do her rounds. As she entered, the patient was sleeping peacefully. Nothing seemed amiss, but on the bedside table lay something that hadn't been there before, small, crumpled photograph. Clara picked it up carefully. The photo was old, its edges yellowed. It showed a man in a brown coat, the same man she had seen. He stood smiling with a young boy, their arms around each other. Clara's throat tightened. She slipped the photo into her pocket, unsure what else to do. Later, she asked one of the senior nurses about it. The woman's face turned serious. "That's Mr. Hargrove," she said quietly. "He used to be a patient here. Years ago he was admitted after a car accident, but he didn't make it. Poor man lost his son in the crash too. People say he still wanders the halls, watching over patients, always checking in, making sure no one dies alone. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The pieces clicked together the way he had sat by the bedsides, the prayer-like whispers, the sadness in his smile. That night, as she passed by room 16 again, she thought she heard the faint shuffle of footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around, but she whispered, "Rest easy, Mr. Hargrove." And for the first time, the hospital's silence felt almost peaceful. Story to the gas station drifter: the graveyard shift at a gas station is supposed to be uneventful, at least. That's what Tyler thought when he started working nights at the Lone Star fuel stop just off Highway 9. The pay was decent, the hours were quiet, and all he had to do was ring up the occasional trucker or late-night traveler. But that was before the drifter began to show up. It was around 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday when Tyler first saw him. A man in his mid-40s, thin frame, hollow cheeks, and eyes so dark they looked almost sunken. He wore a tattered denim jacket, mud-stained boots, and a faded trucker's cap pulled low. The man never spoke. He just walked in, stood by the cooler where the buyer was kept, and stared. "Hey man," Tyler called from behind the counter. "We close alcohol sales at 2. Anything else I can get you?" The drifter didn't answer. He just stood there watching. After a full minute, he turned, walked out the door, and disappeared into the darkness of the parking lot. Tyler let out a shaky laugh, chalking it up to one of the many strange encounters you get working nights. He didn't think much of it until the next night. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the man returned. This time, he didn't go to the cooler. He walked straight to the counter and stood just 3 feet from Tyler. His breath smelled faintly of damp earth. His skin looked paler under the fluorescent lights, stretched tight across sharp cheekbones. Can I help you?" Tyler asked, trying to mask his unease. The man tilted his head, like he was studying him. Then, as if nothing about the encounter was unusual, he turned and walked out again without buying a thing. Tyler stepped out from behind the counter and followed him to the glass doors, but the parking lot was empty. No footsteps, no car pulling away, just stillness. When he checked the security footage later that night, his stomach dropped. The video showed Tyler talking to empty air. He watched himself gesturing toward the counter, speaking nervously, backing away. But there was no drifter. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. The visits continued, every night, to 15 a.m. on the dot. The drifter came in, sometimes standing by the cooler, sometimes approaching the counter, always silent, always staring. Tyler stopped bothering to speak to him. He just endured the man's presence until he left. Then came Friday night. Tyler was restocking shelves when the bell above the door jingled. He glanced at the clock to 15, his heart sank. Sure enough, the drifter shuffled in, but this time, something was different. His boots left wet, muddy prints on the tile. They smelled faintly metallic, like rust. The man's head lifted, and for the first time, Tyler saw his eyes clearly. They weren't just dark, they were hollow gaping voids that seemed to pull in the light. Tyler's throat went dry. He forced himself to stay calm, but every instinct screamed at him to run. He took a cautious step back toward the counter. The drifter mirrored the motion, one step forward. The bell jingled again. Tyler whipped his head toward the door, but no one had entered. When he turned back, the man was gone. Tyler barely slept that morning. By the next shift, his nerves were raw. He decided he had to know more. During a lull in customers, he asked his co-worker Jenna, who worked evenings, if she'd ever seen the man. She frowned. "What man?" "The guy who comes in every night. Denim jacket, trucker cap. Around 2:15. Jenna shook her head. "Ty, nobody comes in that late except you. The cameras would have picked him up." Tyler didn't push it further, but he knew what he saw. That night, he resolved to get proof. When the clock struck to 10, Tyler set his phone to record video and placed it on the counter facing the door. His palms sweated as he waited. At 2:15, the bell chimed. The drifter stepped inside. Same as always. This time, Tyler mustered courage. "Who are you? What do you want?" His voice cracked. The man tilted his head again, then leaned in so close Tyler could feel the cold radiating from his skin. His lips parted, and for the first time, he spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The words were low, gravelly, but carried a weight that made Tyler's chest tighten. Before he could respond, the man turned and walked out. Tyler snatched his phone, heart pounding, and replayed the video. The recording showed the door opening, the bell jingling, but no one entering. It showed Tyler flinching, stepping back, speaking into the empty air, and worst of all, it captured a faint, distorted voice, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." The next day, Tyler couldn't shake the dread. He asked around town, describing the man. Most people shrugged, except for an older trucker who stopped for coffee. "You're talking about Ray," the trucker said. "Ray Thompson. Used to hitch rides up and down this highway. Quiet guy, but folks said he gave off a strange vibe. One night, back in '89, he was walking this very stretch when a semi hit him. Driver never stopped. They found his body in the ditch, what was left of it. Tyler felt his blood run cold. People say he still tries to catch rides," the trucker added, with a grim look. "Shows up at night, waiting for someone to notice him. Guess you did." Tyler quit the job the following week. He never worked another night shift, but sometimes, when he drove home late at night, he swore he saw a figure by the side of the highway. A man in a denim jacket, mud-stained boots, and a faded cap, staring as headlights swept across him. Always at 2:15 in the morning. Story 3, the call center. Phantom. The call center was never meant to be this quiet. During the day, the rows of cubicles buzzed with voices agents handling customer complaints, supervisors pacing, the hum of endless ringing phones. But once midnight rolled around, the noise faded, and only a handful of workers remained. Alina hated the night shift. The building felt hollow, the fluorescent lights cast long shadows, and the silence between calls was suffocating. She worked in the back row, next to an empty cubicle that had been vacant since she started 2 months ago. It was around 1:00 a.m. when she got her first strange call. "Call center support. This is Alina. How can I help you tonight?" she recited with her usual forced cheerfulness. On the other end there was no greeting, only the sound of a woman quietly crying. Alina frowned. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" The sobbing continued, soft and broken, like someone desperately trying to catch their breath. "Ma'am, I can't help you." If the line went dead, Alina stared at her monitor. No number was logged, no account information pulled up, just unknown caller. She shook it off, chalking it up to a prank. People did weird things at night. But 30 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number, same faint weeping. This time the crying was louder, more frantic. Alina slammed the call onto hold and flagged her supervisor. "Darren, I keep getting prank calls," she said. "Same crying woman. Can you trace it?" Darren pulled up the system logs, his expression tightening. "That's odd. These calls aren't coming from outside lines, they're being routed internally." From within the building, Elena's stomach tightened. From another department, he shook his head slowly. "No. From this floor." The calls didn't stop. Over the next week, Alina received them almost every shift, always from unknown, always a woman sobbing, sometimes whispering words she couldn't quite make out. She began to dread the ring of her phone. Each time her hands trembled a little more. Finally, she decided to confront it. The next time the call came, Alina pressed the record button and leaned in close. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Why do you keep calling me?" For a moment, the crying stopped. Then, through the static, a single word slipped out. "Help." The line went dead. Elena's heart hammered. She replayed the recording, hoping she'd imagined it. But the voice was there, faint, cracked, but unmistakable. She took the recording to Darren, who looked pale when he heard it. "Alina," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, but keep it to yourself." He leaned closer. "Before you started here, a woman named Rachel worked the night shift. She was at that cubicle next to you. One night she stayed after her shift. No one knows why. They found her the next morning. She'd hesitated. She'd taken her own life. Right at that desk." Alina felt the air leave her lungs. "You're saying I'm saying maybe these calls aren't prank calls," Darren muttered. "Maybe they're something else." That night, Alina couldn't focus. Every creak of the building made her jump. Every flicker of the overhead lights set her nerves on edge. At 2:37 a.m., her phone rang again. She answered with a shaking hand. The sobbing was louder this time, ragged and raw. "Rachel," Alina whispered. The crying stopped. Then, slowly, the voice rasped. "Cold, so cold." Alina stood, phone pressed to her ear, and turned toward the empty cubicle beside her. Her blood ran cold. The chair was pulled out slightly, as if someone had just stood from it. The line went dead. The following night, Alina decided to end it. She couldn't keep working like this, waiting for the phone to ring. She had to face whatever it was. so when the call came, she didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her headset and walked slowly to the cubicle next door. The chair was pushed neatly in, the desk dusty with disuse. The headset lay coiled on the desk, untouched for months, and yet, the call timer on the monitor lit up. Line active. Someone was on a call from that very station. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She reached out with trembling fingers and picked up the abandoned headset. A blast of static roared in her ear, then the sound of ragged breathing. "Elena," the voice whispered. She dropped the headset in shock. The line went dead. The next day, Elena requested a transfer to the day shift. Darren didn't argue, he looked almost relieved. But curiosity gnawed at her. On her last night shift, she stayed a few minutes late and checked the archives. Rachel had indeed worked nights, assigned to that same cubicle. Her file showed multiple requests for a shift change due to stress, sleep issues, and feeling unsafe. Each request had been denied. The final note on her file read simply, "Deceased on premises." Elena never worked another night again, but sometimes, even on the day shift, when the office grew quiet and her phone rang, she hesitated before answering. Because once, just once, she picked up in broad daylight, and on the other end, faint but undeniable, was the sound of a woman crying. Story for the factory shadow. Most people thought the abandoned textile factory on the edge of town was cursed. Dozens of workers had died there over the decades, accidents with machines, falls from scaffolding, even a fire that killed 3 night shift employees. By the time the factory closed in the early 2000s, it already had a reputation as a place you didn't want to be alone in after dark. But for Michael, the security guard, it was just another paycheck. His job was simple: patrol the grounds, make sure no vandals broke in, and log his rounds every hour. The building was scheduled for demolition in 6 months, but until then, someone had to keep an eye on it. Michael wasn't superstitious. He'd worked plenty of night shifts in creepy places, warehouses, train depots, half-finished skyscrapers. The factory was no different. At least, that's what he told himself during his first few nights. By the 4th shift, the unease began to creep in. It started with noises. While doing his 1 a.m. patrol through the weaving hall, Michael heard the faint clatter of machinery. Looms and spindles that hadn't been powered in years gave off the sound of spinning, clicking, grinding. He froze, listening hard. The sound seemed to come from the far end of the hall. But when he walked toward it, flashlight cutting across the rusting equipment, the noise stopped. Silence pressed in on him, thick and absolute. When he turned to head back, he thought he saw movement in his peripheral vision. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the rows of machines. He spun, lights sweeping across the hall. "Nothing," Michael muttered under his breath. "Just shadows. Just your brain playing tricks." But when he returned to the security office, he logged the incident anyway. A habit drilled into him from years on the job. Always write things down, even if they didn't make sense. 2 nights later, the shadow returned. Michael was patrolling the dying floor, a cavernous room with peeling paint and rusting vats, when his flashlight beam landed on something that made his skin crawl. A human silhouette stood at the far end of the room, perfectly still, perfectly silent. "Who's there?" Michael barked, his voice echoing. The figure didn't move. He took a cautious step forward. "This is private property. You need to leave right now." Still nothing. He lifted his flashlight higher. The beam hit the figure directly and it dissolved. Not disappeared behind something, not slipped into the shadows. It simply melted away like smoke. Michael's heart hammered as he swept the light back and forth. The room was empty. He backed out, every instinct telling him not to turn his back. The following night, Michael brought his phone out during patrol, determined to capture proof. If vandals were sneaking in, he'd catch them. If it was something else, at least he'd have evidence. At 2:12 a.m., as he crossed the weaving hall again, the hair on his neck prickled. He raised his phone, recording video as he swept the flashlight around. There, between 2 rusting looms, a figure moved. Michael zoomed in, his breath catching. The shadow was clearer, now broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a worker's apron. Its head tilted unnaturally, hanging to the side like its neck was broken. "Hey," Michael shouted, voice trembling. "I see you." The figure turned toward him. Its face, if it had one, was a blank smear of darkness. Then it rushed forward. Michael staggered back, the phone slipping from his hand. A blast of cold air struck him as the shadow passed through his body. For an instant, his lungs seized and his vision blurred. His chest burned like he'd stepped into ice water. And then it was gone. Michael collapsed to his knees, gasping. His phone lay face down on the floor. When he picked it up, the recording showed only static. Shaken, Michael nearly quit the next morning, but something gnawed at him. He needed to understand what he had seen. During his day off, he dug through old newspaper archives. What he found made his stomach twist. In 1974, a worker named Thomas Wilkes had been killed in the weaving hole. His apron had caught in the loom, and his neck snapped instantly. The article described the accident in detail, calling it one of the most gruesome tragedies in the factory's history. Michael stared at the grainy black and white photo of Thomas. The man's posture, his broad shoulders, it matched the shadow perfectly. The next time Michael reported for duty, he told himself he'd be ready. He strapped a cross around his neck, tucked a pocket Bible into his jacket, and carried a small tape recorder. At 3 a.m., the weaving hall was alive again with faint clattering. The machines groaned as though waking from slumber. Michael stood his ground, recorder running. "Thomas," he called into the darkness, his voice firm but shaking. "I know what happened to you. I'm not here to hurt you. But this place is gone, it's over." The shadows stirred. He felt the air drop, colder and colder, until his breath fogged. Then, faintly, he heard it. A voice, distant and strained, echoing through the hall. "Leave." Michael's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't angry, it was desperate. The machines rattled louder, as if struck by invisible hands. The shadows swelled, filling the corners, pressing in around him. Michael bolted, sprinting down the hall and bursting into the night air outside. His recorder slipped from his hand, clattering to the concrete. The next morning, when he returned for his shift, the recorder was still lying outside the door. He pressed play with trembling hands. Static filled the tape. Then, buried deep within the noise, came the same voice. "Leave, before it takes you to..." Michael handed in his resignation that afternoon. He never went back to the factory. 6 months later, the building was demolished. But locals whispered that even as the wrecking ball struck, workers heard clattering from inside, like machines refusing to die. And some say on quiet nights, if you stand by the chain-link fence that surrounds the empty lot, you can still hear it. The clatter of looms, the groan of machines, and the faint echo of a man begging you to leave. Story 5. The graveyard shift at the motel. Working the night desk at a roadside motel wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. For Daniel, the job was supposed to be simple: check in the occasional late traveler, keep an eye on the cameras, and try not to fall asleep before dawn. The Pinecrest Motel sat just off the interstate, a squat, L-shaped building with 20 rooms, a faded neon sign, and a reputation for being cheap rather than comfortable. Most of the guests were truckers, families on long drives, or the kind of people who didn't want their names remembered. For weeks, Daniel's shifts were uneventful. The occasional drunk guest, a few noise complaints, but nothing serious. Until room 6. It started one Tuesday at around 3 a.m. A man walked in, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel shirt damp with rain. His boots tracked mud across the lobby floor as he leaned over the counter. "Room," he said flatly. His voice was low, tired. Daniel blinked. Sure, ID and card." The man slid a wad of crumpled cash across the desk. No ID, no card, just bills that looked damp, almost stained. Daniel hesitated, then figured it wasn't worth an argument. He assigned him to room 6, handed over the key, and watched the man shuffle down the hallway without another word. But when Daniel checked the logbook a few hours later, the transaction wasn't there. No payment recorded, no key signed out. Room 6 was still listed as vacant. He frowned, rubbed his tired eyes, and decided he'd made a mistake. The next night, the man came again. Same time, same flat expression, same room. This time, Daniel made sure to write it down. He logged the cash payment, noted the name as guest no ID, and gave him the key. But when he checked the logbook at sunrise, the entry was gone, as if it had never been written. When he asked the morning manager if anyone had been in room 6, the man looked puzzled. "Room 6 has been empty all week." Daniel didn't argue, but unease crawled under his skin. By the third night, Daniel couldn't deny something was wrong. He watched on the security monitors as the man walked down the hall toward room 6. The camera flickered, static, distorting the feed. When the picture returned, the hall was empty. He checked the room 20 minutes later. The bed was perfectly made, the bathroom spotless, no trace of anyone staying there, but the air felt heavy, damp, and when he turned to leave, he heard it whispers, low and urgent, coming from the corner. He spun, but the room was empty. He didn't sleep when his shift ended. The following evening, curiosity outweighed fear. Daniel decided to stay outside room 6 after the man checked in. He hid around the corner, heart hammering. As the guest shuffled down the hall, the man stopped at the door, slid the key in, and entered without hesitation. The door shut with a dull click. Daniel waited a minute, then two, then he slipped the spare master key from his pocket and unlocked the door. The room was dark. The man was gone. The bed was untouched, sheets crisp and clean. A faint smell of damp earth hung in the air, mixed with something metallic. On the nightstand lay a single item, a wallet. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands. It was old, the leather cracked, the contents water damaged. Inside was a faded driver's license. The photo showed the same man, the name John Kessler, the expiration date 1987. Daniel brought the wallet to the morning manager, who went pale when he saw it. "Where did you get this?" he asked sharply. "Room 6, Daniel said. "Guest left it there." The manager shook his head slowly. "That's impossible. John Kessler was a truck driver. Stayed here back in 87. He was murdered in that room, stabbed to death after a poker game went wrong. Police found his body in the bathtub." Daniel's skin went cold. "Room 6 has been empty ever since," the manager added. "We never rented out. Too many stories. Guests complained of whispers, cold drafts, nightmares. We just keep it on the books so it doesn't look suspicious." That night, Daniel almost refused to clock in, but some part of him, curiosity, or maybe foolishness, needed answers. When the man arrived again at 3 a.m., Daniel didn't hand him the key. Instead, he forced himself to ask, "John, what do you want?" The man froze. Slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were dark hollows, empty and endless. Mud dripped from his boots onto the lobby floor. "Room," he rasped again. Daniel's hand shook. "You're already in room 6. You've never left." For the first time, the man's expression changed. His mouth twisted into something between a grimace and a smile. Then he turned and walked away, fading before he even reached the hallway. The next morning, room 6 was bricked up. The owner decided it was better to erase it than to keep dealing with complaints. The number was removed from the door, the furniture taken out, the space sealed. But Daniel knew it wasn't enough. Sometimes, during his shifts, he still heard the bell above the door chime at exactly 3 a.m. He still saw damp footprints leading down the hallway to where room 6 used to be. And on the nights he was brave enough to check the monitors, the camera always flickered to static at that exact moment, because John Kessler was still checking in. And he always would.